Hello there, and welcome back to the Codex. Today we're going to be talking about a full Saryn loadout, which is absurdly good, and will solve any problems you might have in the game, as long as that problem involves killing a lot of enemies. So let's go ahead and go over that. First, let's talk about the Archon shards on the build before looking at the mods. So I'm using two non-Tau Forged Emerald shards. The reason these are non-Tau Forged is because having two of these being not Tau Forged already gives you +4 to corrosive stacks, which is enough for a full armor strip. Now, the argument for using Tau Forge would be that when you're fighting enemies that have status caps like Acolytes, Necromechs, things like that, any enemy that has a cap to how many stats you can put on them, like, for example, on Acolytes, you can only put on 4 corrosive procs. These shards do override that, so if you use Tau Forged against them, that will actually result in even more corrosive procs than usual, because, for example, with these two on, instead of being able to put on 4, I can put on 8. If these were Tau Forged, that would be 10 stacks of corrosive. So it does matter against those. That's a bit of a niche use case. So it's up to you if you want to make those Tau Forged or not. Now, for the other shards, we're using 2 Tau Forged Crimson shards for ability strength. So together, this is another 30% strength on top of the mods. And then we have 1 Tau Forged parkour velocity, just because it makes the frame feel much better to move around with. Now let's go into the actual build here. Now, this is a triple umbral build, but before everybody collectively loses their minds in the comments, this build does not actually take 3 Umbra Forma. I was playing around with a lot of different builds, and previously I had a build on that did require 3, but this current version of the build, if you have the other slots properly polarized, which I don't, this build only takes 2 Umbra Forma. And if some of your rank 10 mods are not max rank, you could even get away with only using 1. For example, if you have this exact build with the other slots polarized, and just 2 Umbra Forma, you're actually only 2 capacity off of it being able to be only a 1 Umbra Forma build. So if you're still in the process of getting all these mods to 10, then you might be able to fit the build you see here with only a single Umbra Forma until you progress a little farther in the game and get more into it and whatnot. So just keep that in mind. Now, with this setup, we do have a pretty nice chunk of health and armor, of course, due to the nature of triple umbral. People seem to think that health tanking doesn't scale, but realistically, this build can go for several hours in Steel Path, largely thanks to pairing this level of health tanking with the Gloom helmet that we have replacing the 4th ability. This is a massive utility and defensive increase to your ability to survive without having to rely on shield gating spam. Although, to clarify, Saryn is really good with shield gating because she has one of the best gate abilities in the game in the form of Molt, because this ability has no casting animation time. It literally casts instantaneously, so you can spam it like 20 times in a single second if you need to, and get just an infinite amount of shields back. So if you are going for a shield gating build, just swap some of these mods out, put on stuff like Rolling Guard. You can put on more Augur mods in your secondary, etc., and you can get your Molt to be a super excellent shield gating ability. But for this, we're just health tanking with Gloom. Now, for the rest of the mods, it's pretty basic. It's what you would expect. Of course, we have some duration, we have Prime Flow. We have just what I think is the perfect amount of range for this build between Augur Reach and Stretch, putting us at 175. I think this gives us a nice amount of range to make spores still spread in a relevant radius without making the Gloom radius so large that it becomes annoying in things like survival, because you don't want to run like 250% range on Gloom and have enemies be slowed so far away that it dramatically affects your KPM in a negative manner. So that's why I optimized it for that amount of range. Now, the Arcanes are Arcane Energized. Of course, this just gives us good energy sustain. And then Arcane Avenger paired with Combat Discipline hurting us every time we take damage, which is negated by the heal from Gloom, means that Avenger is basically constantly up for the flat extra plus 45% crit chance that it gives us. And again, this is not 45% modded crit chance. This is literally plus 45% flat crit chance. So if after your mods, your weapon is at 100% crit chance, for example, you'll go from 100 to 145. This is straight up plus 45. It's extremely strong. Now, with the Saryn build out of the way, let's go over the weapons that we're using. Now, obviously, there's a lot of weapons that are excellent with Saryn. Just to quickly go through some, I'm about to go over the primary, which is the Sybaris Prime Incarnate in my case, but obviously the Torrid is amazing. Basically, any other Incarnate is amazing, like the Miter, etc. Kuver, Tenet weapons, like the Archiplasmor will shred on her. Basically, any weapon in the game shreds on Saryn, especially because one thing I forgot to mention is we are using Venom Dose in the build here. This does give us free corrosive damage. With this amount of strength, it's over 200% corrosive damage. So, it's super strong. Also, speaking of strength, I forgot to mention this. So this build only has 207 strength, because we have 77% strength from the 3 Umbral mods, making Umbral Intensify give plus 77. And then we have 30% from the Archon shards, if you recall. That's why we're at 207. So the Gloom here is only a 72% slow. Now, if you want, you can make this higher. If you want to use the Matter-Eye Focus School and pop the Sling Strength, that'll give you another 40% strength, which will take you up to 247 strength, which is about an 86% slow. Or if you want to use Nidus Specters, if you throw out a Nidus Specter, they will give you a multiplicative 28% link, which means it's a 1.28x strength multiplier, so you'll go from 207 to around 265, which is around a 92% slow. Now, going from 72% slow to closer to 90% is actually a dramatic increase because, for example, let's just round the numbers. Let's compare 75 to 90. A 75% slow means that you're slowing enemies down to 1/4 of their original speed. A 90% slow means that you're slowing enemies to 1/10 of their original speed. So that is 2.5 times the slow, which is a dramatic increase in survivability because it's an animation slow again. It doesn't just reduce how fast they move and run. It actually makes them shoot and melee slower. So if you reduce an enemy's gunfire by 90% as opposed to 75%, that is a 2.5x reduction in the amount of DPS that they do. So it's actually a dramatic difference for your defensive and survival capabilities. So just keep that in mind if you want to boost that up. Now let's go over the primary here. We are using a Sybaris Prime Incarnate. This weapon is absolutely insane, just in general, but especially on Saryn, because this weapon forced procs Blast. Gotta say that slowly, apparently. So Blast is insane on Saryn because it has some very funny interactions with Toxic Lash. It does a lot of damage. It causes Toxic Lash to occur quite a bit. Let's put it that way. It's incredibly strong. So we have, this is just a pure viral build. This is the build that I use just on, well, I actually don't use this build because I have a Riven, but this is the build that you would use regardless if you're playing on Saryn or not. This becomes better on Saryn. So I just go into viral because I want to increase the amount of damage that those forced blast procs do. So in terms of what I actually bought into the weapon, I go viral because the status effect of viral is a damage multiplier. So if I'm shooting an enemy while they're still alive, I apply a few viral procs to them, and then when those blast procs actually do detonate, they get multiplied by said viral procs. Now, the really nice thing about the fact that the Sybaris Incarnate does AoE damage in the form of blast procs, but since blast procs are AoE from a status effect and not because it's actually an AoE weapon, Galvanized Aptitude actually does apply. Galvanized Aptitude or any of the Galvanized damage stacking mods don't apply to AoE damage, but blast procs, even though they are in an area of effect, they don't count as AoE because they're from a status, not from an actual weapon-bound explosion. So the damage scaling of Galvanized Aptitude fully applies. So on this build, since we're playing as Saryn, which gets free corrosive damage and free toxin damage from Venom Dose and Toxic Lash combined together, this build is actually Impact / Puncture, and then the modded Viral and Corrosive and Toxin on top of that. So this is 6 different stats effects. So that's 6 times the 80%. So that's like a 480% extra base damage, which is, of course, absolutely absurd. Now, the reason why I'm using a Galvanized Scope and a Critical Delay on this weapon is because, as you can see, with just Critical Delay, on the Incarnate form, we're only looking at 90% crit chance. So Galvanized Scope pushing you up to guaranteed crits and beyond to around the halfway orange critting point is quite the damage increase. And then when you pair that with the 45% flat crit chance from the Avenger that we're running, you're hitting almost entirely orange crits, percent-wise. So it's quite the damage bump. Just make sure that you're hitting those headshots and ADSing. Now, speaking of headshots, we're running Deadhead as the Arcane for the basic 360% damage bonus, plus an extra 30% multiplicative modifier to headshot, which is a huge damage increase. And then also the recoil reduction paired with stabilizer means that it has minus 100% recoil, so it's an absolute laser beam. So for the Incarnate evolutions, on the second evolution here, I'm running the magazine capacity instead of the recoil that a lot of people run, because I'm already getting minus 100% recoil from the mod, so I think that the base magazine capacity going up by 12, meaning you go from, I believe, 20 to 32 shots in the magazine, gives you more time without having to reload to build up that Incarnate charge. Now, the other evolution is the first one. We're using the multi-shot one, which is the second evolution. Again, for this one, we're using the first evolution, which is the magazine size. And then for the third evolution, we are, of course, using Survivor's Edge, which gives you crit chance and status chance. It's, I think, basically by far the best one because you always want that raw crit chance to scale off of. Now we're using the Ocucor for the second weapon here. Now again, the Ocucor is dramatically benefiting from the fact that we're playing as Saryn via Galvanized Shot. Since Saryn, again, is adding corrosive and toxin procs, this build is actually the viral, puncture, heat, and radiation you see here, plus corrosive and toxin. So again, 6 status effects, the Galvanized Shot to scale from. And in this case, it's even better because the secondary version of this mod scales 3 times. So this is 120% base damage per status type. So 120% times 6 is 720% extra base damage, which is why we're not running a base damage arcane here. We get so much base damage from Galvanized Shot and so much damage from the full armor strip from shards and Toxic Lash, Forced Dots, and etc., that we can use secondary Fortifier to get Overguard on our Saryn. So this is another defensive layer. This will also make you status immune, so as long as you have Overguard, no negative status effects can apply to you, including knockdown. So if you don't have Prime Surefooted, this is especially good. And this will actually do more damage to Eximus enemies, since this is a raw 8x damage multiplier, so you'll actually do more damage against Eximus, and just technically slightly less to regular enemies, although you'll still instantly melt them, so you won't notice it. So this is basically just free Overguard, free survivability. Super easy. Then in terms of the build here, it's viral heat, so we're just going for the classic, burn them alive setup. Always use Rudeness extension on this weapon. The +8 meter beam length also applies to the extra beams that the Ocucor creates on kill. So this is exceptional quality of life. Now you'll see we don't have a crit chance mod on here in the form of like normal raw crit chance, but that's because we're using Sentient Surge. If you're using the Ocucor, you should have this. Hopefully you got this from the Nabrus event that we just had in October if you didn't have it already. This gives you 240% crit chance and status chance once it's fully stacked up, along with basically infinite ammo, because every time you kill someone, it reloads your magazine by 20%. So with this stacked up all the way, your actual crit chance is 54%, which sounds really bad, but since this weapon has puncture damage on it and it procs status super fast, keep in mind that puncture procs also act like Avenger up to 25%. So once you have the max puncture procs on an enemy, which would be basically instantaneous on this weapon, you get an additional flat 25% crit chance. So when you add that to the 54% that you'll have after Sentient Surge, you're actually going to be at 79% crit chance on this weapon natively. And then again, thanks to Saryn running Arcane Avenger, boom, you're now over 100% crit chance. So not only are you always critting, but you're even a little bit into orange crit territory. So it's much better than the 16% makes it look here. So just make sure that you keep that in mind. And now on to the melee. We are using the disgustingly good dual Ichor and Karnan. Now this is a melee influence setup, as you can see here. So it's classic viral electric. Although again, we're running Saryn, so you get that free corrosive, free toxin. So it's viral, electric, impact, puncture, slash, and corrosive and toxin. So lots of different status effects. Now, there is going to be people in the comments probably pointing out the fact that Condition Overload does not scale up the damage of the clouds. That is correct. So if you care more about the damage of the clouds left behind by the dual Ichor and Karnan, you can put on Pressure Point. But because we're going to be spreading so many elemental status effects around via melee influence, because keep in mind it only spreads elemental effects, Condition Overload is going to be a massive damage increase for those electric and toxin procs that we're going to be proccing from Toxic Lash. So even though it doesn't spread impact, slash, and puncture through influence, we are going to have viral and electric on the weapon, plus the corrosive and toxin added. So that's 4 different status effects. So this is going to be 80% times 4. So that's going to be 320% increased base damage for the electric and toxin spraying through influence, as opposed to you would only get 165 from Prime Pressure Point. So that's why I'm doing this. Galvanized Elementalist coming out did make me replace the regular Galvanized mod on this, because this is not a heavy build, this is a combo build. So I thought that sacrificing 10% status damage for that nice extra chunk of status chance was really good on this, because the more status, the more damage you're spreading. I'm still keeping Weeping Wounds on here, because Weeping Wounds is such a dramatic damage increase on this weapon that I think not running it is insane, because it adds like literal hundreds of percents of status chance. Because with the Incarnate Evolution, you have a massive base status starting value, because the third evolution here gives you plus 34% base status chance, which is absurd. The mod scaling off of this is wild. Now for the rest of them, since we're playing as Saryn, I chose the increased base damage by plus 90, along with the 5 additional combo on target affected by toxin. This means that every time you hit a person with Toxic Lash Up, basically you'll gain 6 combo hits instead of 1. So even if you don't run any combo duration, you can instantaneously get back to 12x. It's amazing. We're running the 0.6 range increase on here because, as you saw on the build itself, we're not running primed reach, so I don't have any other source of primed, or any other source of range, rather, so I thought this would be the best to take. You could argue for the combo duration, although, again, on Saryn specifically, you get back up to 12x so fast it doesn't matter. And then for the third one, again, the space status chance. Now, speaking of the combo, I'm running Neramon. If you want to run Matter Eye instead, so that you can buff up your Gloom percent, with the Power Strength buff, go ahead and run Matter Eye. If you care about meleeing a lot, and you don't want to lose your combo, you can run Neramon. Just keep them. It's up to you what you think, because again, you get back to 12x instantaneously. Even if you're not meleeing consistently, you can just whip these out, have your Toxic Lash active, and you'll literally be at 12x after about 5 seconds of meleeing. So it's up to you whether or not you want to run Neramon. Now for the Companion, I'm not running Panzer. You can run the Panzer, and I haven't found it to really be a huge problem, but whenever I talk about using the Panzer with Saryn, people point out the fact that the viral spores that the Panzer spreads interfere with the corrosive spores from Saryn herself. It conflicts, like, which spores are allowed to be on the enemies. So I switched over to using Nautilus instead. This is the build. We have Reinforced Bond on here because with Calculated Redirection, you have enough shields to get that free 60% fire rate, so that's a nice little free DPS increase for your Sybaris and your Ocucor. Very nice. Of course, we're using Cordon to group enemies up. This is especially good if you want to go a melee-focused Saryn with those dual Ichors, because enemies being grouped up will just increase the KPM of your melee output. And the rest of the build's basically what you would expect. We have Manifold Bond on here, so that things like Cordon and Guardian can go off constantly. And then the rest of it is basically survivability. When you pair Calculated Redirection, which you're going to be running anyway if you want to trigger Reinforced Bond, with Accelerated Deflection, this makes your Nautilus much tankier, because it'll get that shield gate back a lot faster with this 90% shield recharge and 45% shield recharge delay reduction. So it's really nice if you want your Nautilus to stay alive. If you feel like you don't need this, you can drop this out for something else. There's a lot of choices. If you're running an Equilibrium setup, you could use Synth Deconstruct. There's so many mods to go over, it doesn't matter. Just think about it for yourself. And of course, run Vacuum. Now for the weapon here, this is basically a cold primer. So we're using Shivering Contagion plus cold damage means that your Verglass will be freezing all the enemies around you into a just ice block, basically, so the crowd control is hilarious. And since we're running gas, radiation, and cold, even if you weren't applying any statuses yourself, the Verglass itself can apply 3 statuses to make sure that Manifold Bond is constantly going off, because this does require 3 unique status effects. Although playing a Saryn, that's really not going to be an issue, so realistically, if you want to, you could drop Radiated Reload for something else, because it's basically impossible to not have at least 3 status effects on an enemy when you're playing a Saryn, so keep that in mind. If you want to drop Radiated Reload for whatever other mod suits your purposes, you can go ahead and do that. The main thing here is just that we're running Cold plus Shivering Contagion makes this a huge quality of life and defensive buff for any enemies that are around you being affected by this. Alright, that was a lot. Hopefully that was a good rundown, though. So now let's hop into a Conjunction Survival and showcase how this actually performs. Alright, we are here in the mission. I did decide to keep Neramon on, so it's, like I said, it's up to you whether or not how much you care about melee, but just keep that in mind. Got some energy going, let's pop my Gloom here. Let's start meleeing. You can see instantly 12x. It's actually disgusting how fast that was. That's why I say that Neramon is not required. And let's show the dual Ichors here, because I have a feeling that a lot of people are going to like the melee focus Saryn if you run a loadout like this. Now look at what the Verglass, look at this. All these guys instantly frozen. Any groups of enemies that get around you, just give it like 2 seconds, boom, all instantly frozen. The utility is wild. Now if you are ever playing specifically on this mission, keep in mind that this guy here, the Lone Guardian, he gives you 50% extra power strength. So if I recast my Gloom near him, you can see now if I go into my ability tab, my Gloom is at 95%. So he just maxed out my Gloom for me by casting near him. So that's a nice little tip for specifically playing on this mission. The same thing applies if you're playing in a Fisher mission and you get corrupted. Recast that Gloom while you're corrupted to benefit from that double power strength. That way you can cap out that Gloom, cap out that slow, cap out that lifesteal, and you're good to go. Now, as long as you keep that Gloom cast going, it's going to stay there permanently, because it's snapshots, it's a channeled ability, so it stays up constantly as long as you don't get nullified or turn it off. Now let's switch to the Sybaris here. As you can see, lots of red crits, thanks to the build that we're running plus Avenger. Let's activate the Incarnate mode. And yeah, it's I mean, it's gross. It wouldn't even matter if I was applying no armor strip whatsoever. Like, if I had 0 corrosive damage here, and they had full armor, these guys would not stand a chance. And I've taken this weapon, like, with this build, to 10 times this enemy level, and the kill time is effectively unchanged, especially given the fact that we are armor stripping. It doesn't matter if these guys are level 182 like that guy, or if they're level 1,820, you know, 10x level. You're not going to notice a difference in kill time because this build does so much damage, has so much defense stripping and enemy debuffing, that it's just irrelevant what level they are. Now let's switch to the Ocucor. This will take a moment, just gotta get charged up with the kills here to activate Sentient Surge. And then once we do, you can see you don't even have to aim. It's just free. Let me turn on Venom Dose and Lash again. There we go. I mean, just look at the numbers on the screen. This is, I think, what's the term? You can't really challenge the fact that this has got to be the best secondary on Saryn. It's absurd. I mean, look at this. You don't have to aim. Now, there's obviously a lot of other secondaries that are absolutely incredible, just in general, then especially on Saryn, like the dual Toxicist Incarnate, the Sybaris Incarnate. Those do technically deal more damage, like on a per shot basis. But do you need to do more damage in this? Like, do you want to do more damage that you don't need, or do you want to be able to kill an entire crowd of enemies without even having to aim? It's like, pick one, you know? It's incredible. You instantaneously spread their armor, you instantly apply an enormous amount of heat procs, all the toxin procs from Toxin Lash. I can't even see most of the enemies that I'm killing because there's so many numbers on the screen from an entire crowd in front of me dying that I can't see them actually die. That's how good this thing is. I mean, it's disgusting. And the Acolyte performance of this build is also hilarious. The only weapon on the loadout that's not good at killing Acolytes is this Ocucor. That's the only downside of the Ocucor, being, you know, the fact that it gets a lot of its damage from rapid status application makes it not good against Acolytes due to their status cap. But the Sybaris Incarnate and the Ichor Incarnate will instantaneously shred Acolytes. And on the survivability front, you can see this build has 0 issues surviving whatsoever. Let's get this Incarnate charged back up here. Now I'm going to skip ahead so you guys don't have to wait too long to where the Acolyte spawns in, and then I'll show you what the Ichor does against them, for example. Oh, actually, I don't have to skip ahead. Here we go. Look how fast this gets recharged. Boom. We're back on the Incarnate. We're at full stacks. Let's let the guy spawn in. Here we go. How you guys? How you doing? How you doing? Yeah, get out of here. Goodbye. There you go. He didn't get a chance to move because of Gloom. He was 95% slowed because the Gloom does work on Acolytes. And then you just eviscerate them with the unholy amount of damage that the setup does. So yeah, this is the extremely overkill Saryn loadout. I just want you guys to see that. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Let me know down below if you did like this video, and if you want to see more videos like this. Consider liking, consider subscribing, sharing the video to other people who might like it. You have no idea how much it helps the channel. Still trying to hit 10,000 subs. Like I said, liking, commenting helps the algorithm. You know how it is. You gotta play the game. You guys are great. I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.